Chinese refineries abandon Russian oil after US sanctions. We'll talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network, UK member Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Mikhail Mishustin, met with the leader of China, Xi Jinping, during his visit to Beijing. The politicians agreed on new joint projects. What were the main objectives of Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin's visit to Beijing, in your opinion? In light of current global political dynamics, how are Russia and China adapting their economic partnership to mitigate external sanctions and geopolitical challenges?
Well, first of all, Russia is looking with concern at what is happening between Washington and Beijing, because that's exactly what they don't want to see. They don't want better relationship between the United States and China. And now we see this, let's say, a truce, this tactical truce, if I can put it this way, with China, between the United States and China regarding trade. Yes, there is no trade agreement, and this is a good sign for Moscow. Of course, they're happy about it. But we see that the United States reduced tariffs on different goods from China. And in general, those tariffs are reduced. In response, China suspended new restrictions on rare earth exports for 1 year. And Russia is not happy about it. Russia wants to see less cooperation between the United States and China, obviously, and because they understand that with more cooperation, or with having an agreement, a real agreement, a real document that Washington and Beijing can sign, something as of a treaty, as something to trade treaty or trade agreement, something like that. This would be a negative sign for Moscow, because after that, after signing a trade agreement, after signing something with China, of course, Washington would go to pressure China in order for China to buy less Russian oil, buy less Russian resources, and in general, invest less in Russian economy. For now, no trade agreement, so the Kremlin must be happy about it. Yet they are concerned. Yet we've seen their concern, and they need to make sure that Beijing is still an ally, is still a close ally of the Kremlin. Some say that the meeting between, as President Trump says, the meeting between him and Xi Jinping went, he can give it a 12 if 10 is the highest mark, so it's 12 out of 10. But Trump wanted something else apart from a trade agreement. He also wanted a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And some sources are contemplating whether Moscow has something to do with Kim Jong-un not meeting Donald Trump. Whether North Korea and that meeting with Kim Jong-un would have been a prize for Donald Trump, because he is sure that he can communicate with anyone and that it makes him a strong leader. He sees himself as a strong leader if he talks to Kim Jong-un, if he talks to the leader of North Korea. But wouldn't it be somehow possible that Moscow is behind it? Moscow is behind Trump not getting that prize from North Korean leader. Maybe that might be. That's just an idea. That's just one of those ideas of different sources that have been commenting on President Trump's recent trip to Asia. So right now, the Kremlin is very active in the region. For the Kremlin, it's very important to have close ties with the region, and of course, first of all, with China and with all other countries of the region. So that is why they rushed to action, and they rushed to really make sure that Beijing is still Moscow's ally. And it's extremely important for Russia, it's extremely important for Moscow that China continues buying Russian oil, continues buying Russian resources, continues selling everything to Russia. So that is why, of course, immediately after President Trump's visit, that the other visit was also paved, but from Russia.
Alexandra, but we see that Chinese oil refineries have begun to refused to purchase Russian oil after the US and other Western countries imposed sanctions on leading Russian producers and some of their customers, Bloomberg reports. And according to the agency, state-owned companies Sinopec and PetroChina have already cancelled a number of deliveries after the US added Rosneft and Lukoil to its sanctions list last month. Even smaller private refineries are temporarily halting purchases for fear of being sanctioned, as happened with Shandong Yulong Petrochemical Co., which was recently restricted by the UK and the EU. We understand that how significant is the impact of Western sanctions on China's decision to hold oil purchases from major Russian producers like Rosneft and Lukoil? What role do the US and not only US but EU sanctions play in reshaping China's energy strategy and its relationship with Russian oil suppliers?
It looks like those sanctions are actually working. Of course, not just mere one sanction, one type of sanctions is working. It's all working together. It's all working, only all those different elements of sanctions that actually work and that actually influence China's decisions, India's decisions, Turkey's decisions. It's all working. Because, for example, if we look at Chinese trade with Russia, it's huge. Of course, it's huge because in the last 3 years, Russia started buying everything from China. And if we look at the Chinese trade with the United States, so if we compare it by sheer numbers, we see that China sells more to the United States than all of it trade with Russia combined. So China is way more interested in American market. China needs American market, and a Russian market is important. Of course, we understand it's a big bonus. China is getting great bonuses from what's happening in Europe. But still, even though the trade has been bigger and bigger and the contracts has been covering wider elements of economy, but still China is way more interested in trade with the United States. If we judge by the numbers, and we see that even with tariffs, even with all the restrictions, still only the goods that China is selling to the United States without buying anything, only the goods that China is selling to the United States, the whole trade with Russia from China and to China is way less than what China is just selling to the United States. So, of course, China is interested in the American market, and China doesn't want any restrictions on itself. And Chinese companies that maybe more private companies, they don't look at the government that much, or they don't rely on government that much, but still they are in line. We understand that Chinese economy is still not fully free market economy, so they are still in line, and they will be in line with the government. So that is why we see that Chinese companies, they are looking for alternatives. They're looking for new opportunities. They're looking for some place else to buy its oil from, to buy its resources from, especially with everything that's happening with Venezuela. That's also a possibility over there. And with the American help, that might be a better opportunity, rather, for China. So we understand that those sanctions are working. Those sanctions are working in China. Those sanctions are working in India. Those sanctions are working in Turkey. And as you absolutely correctly said, not only the American ones, the European ones, in general, it's pressure on anyone who is buying Russian resources. So right now, everyone is moving in sync with President Trump, who always says one thing, that trade can bring people to the negotiating table. Trade or tariffs can be the reason why someone would start a negotiation. And everyone is looking forward to Putin actually doing something about a negotiation or stopping at the front line, just as President Trump has asked him to, or just as the Europeans have talked about, just as Ukraine agreed to many months ago. And we don't see Moscow moving in that direction. But with those sanctions, with China and Chinese companies, certain Chinese companies, not all of them, but certain Chinese companies refusing or at least trying not to, or trying to find some other ways to find to buy oil someplace else. When we see that happening, of course, we understand that this affects the Russian market, this affects Russian economy, and those new restrictions will definitely make a change in Russian economy and in Russian relations with China too in general.
Alexandra, yes, President Donald Trump expressed confidence in an interview with CBS News that the war in Ukraine could be resolved in a short period, roughly within a couple of months. When asked by a journalist whether he believed the war in Ukraine could end within a couple of months, Trump responded, I think we're going to get it done. He said the American leader also added that, in his view, Moscow is seeking to reestablish contact with Washington. And he said, I think Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, really wants to do business with the US, Trump noted. How should we interpret President Trump's claim that the war in Ukraine could be resolved within a couple of months? It sounds almost like a bad joke. It reads more like an absurd claim than a credible assessment. And President Trump mentioned that Moscow wants to do business with the US. Could you clarify what he meant by that?
I think what we see here actually is the moment in time when the United States do not know what to do, when the White House doesn't know what to do. Because if we talked, I would say 6 months or 8 months ago with you, I think we could hear the same things from President Trump. We've heard all this. It's repetitive. We've already heard those months. It can be, he can end it in a few months, in a few weeks, in 60 days, something like that. We already heard all that. So right now, I think we see that the United States, or rather President Trump and his administration, is a little lost regarding what to do with Vladimir Putin, regarding what to do with the Kremlin. President Trump is repeating himself because it always worked, because those trade negotiations always worked, because tariffs always worked. In that same interview with 60 Minutes with CBS, Donald Trump said that the way he managed to end almost all of the wars, he ended 8 wars, but of course he said that the war in the Middle East was different. But regarding all other wars, President Trump ended them by either offering some trade negotiations or trade contracts, or by actually saying that he would impose horrible tariffs on the fighting parties, on the fighting countries, on their products coming to the United States, so they won't be able to sell anything in the United States. So it worked, as President Trump himself said, that worked each and every time, apart from the Middle East, of course, because it was a whole different story. But it worked, and this is the way Trump wants to see things end. And this is a way he thinks he might really end the war. But since he's repeating himself, since it's the same thing that we heard and it's the thing that did not work. We saw it not working even after Trump's visit to Alaska, even after meeting Vladimir Putin in Alaska, it still didn't work. That strategy didn't work. So now it feels like they're looking for another key to open that box and to really try to make Putin stop his army at the front lines right now, or freeze rather the army. But they still don't know what to do. That is why it feels like this interview has been recorded, I don't know, 6 months ago, 8 months ago. We've heard all this. They still don't know how to act. They still don't know what to do. We understand that within the American administration, there are different streams of politicians and their views on how to act regarding the Kremlin. And we understand that, for example, Marco Rubio, State Secretary, is a hawk on Russia, and he has his own view on how to approach Putin and how to make Putin either sit down and talk, or really stop at the front line and talk later. But Marco Rubio is not the only one in the administration, and he's not the only one who is influencing President Trump. So I feel like we've heard all this, and this only indicates one thing. Somehow we see the administration being lost on what to do, what path to take. They are confused how to act. So maybe things will change. Maybe they will find a way. They will find that key. But as of now, what I see is rather confusion.
Alexandra, yes, President Donald Trump has said that he is not currently considering the possibility of supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. When asked whether his administration is considering providing Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles, Trump replied, "No, not really." He added that he could change his mind, but for now, his answer is no. Is this position based on military assessments, diplomatic considerations, or concerns about escalation? I don't know, what are the main factors influencing President Trump's decision not to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine?
It falls into the same category as the previous one. The same thing. We've heard all this. We already heard it. It could have been recorded a few months ago. That's the same thing that we've already heard. Yeah, the war can end in a few months. Okay, I'm not giving Tomahawk missiles. Okay, we've all been there. We've all seen that. It's confusion. It's just mere confusion on how to act, what to do right now, how to approach the Kremlin, because the way President Trump was absolutely positive would work, that way didn't work. It just failed. We see it fail time and time again. It failed. Trade negotiations, the possibility of offering something to Russia in exchange for their stop. No, it didn't work. It didn't work because ideology is way more important for Putin and for the Kremlin than economy or financial stability or anything like that. Putin is only interested in actually gaining more territory, getting Ukraine's territory in particular, and nothing else. He's way less interested, as we understand, he's way less interested in making business with the United States than getting Ukrainians' territory. And that's just, that's out of the question for President Trump. For Trump, it's unbearable. That's impossible for Trump. So now, that's the same thing as the previous question. He's saying he won't give Tomahawks. We've been there. It's a repetition of what we've already heard and what we've already seen. So I think here again they are at lost. They don't know what to do exactly. Yes, they want the European Union, they want NATO to take more responsibility and give their own long-range missiles. Yes. But we see those words by President Trump, we see those answers by President Trump, and at the same time, we understand that the intelligence is being given to Ukraine, that all the information needed is being given to Ukraine. So nothing stops there. It's just that President Trump just doesn't know how to act. I think it all falls into that one confusion territory and in that one indecisiveness of what path to actually take.
Alexandra, Trump also says he is not taking part in discussions on Russia's frozen assets. According to a White House broadcast, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump was asked whether the White House planned to use Russian assets as a bargaining tool. He said, "I'm not doing that. What happens is, I guess Europe and Russia are having discussions. I'm not involved in those discussions," the president said. Given that portion of these frozen Russian assets is under U.S. jurisdiction, why does the president believe this is primarily a European matter?
I think he actually wants Congress to act, because we know that there is in one of the Senate committees, Committee on Foreign Relations, the exact committee where Marco Rubio has been in since 2011, if I'm not mistaken, or at least for many years, he has been part of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. In that exact Foreign Relations Committee, they on the floor they have a bill regarding Russian frozen assets, that are controlled by the United States. So President Trump probably wants Congress to act. He doesn't want to be the one making that decision. He doesn't want to be the one being blamed by the Kremlin for this decision, or by anyone, really. But he wants the Congress to take responsibility. He never said anything against that bill that's on the floor of at least for now the committee. It still didn't pass the committee. We know the government shutdown is on. So first it needs to pass the committee, then it will go to the floor of the whole Senate, then it might pass the Senate, it might pass the House of Representatives, and then it may or may not be signed by President Trump, but in any case, this will be a document by Trump's pen, let's say, or just ready to sign by President Trump, that can really threaten Russia, that can really threaten the Kremlin. So as of now, President Trump, yes, he wants Europe to take care of all the Russian frozen assets in Europe. But regarding Russian frozen assets controlled by the United States, President Trump doesn't want to be seen taking that decision. It would be even better for him if, for example, 67 senators voted for that bill. That would lift all of responsibility from President Trump, because this will overcome this number, is 67 out of 100. This number will override even President Trump's veto, because 67 overrides a veto of the president. So he cannot be blamed for it at all. But for that, we need to wait for the government to be opened, for the government to start working. The government shutdown is still going strong and with no end in sight. So I guess it's only let's say, an attempt by President Trump to be seen impartial. He's impartial. Europeans must take care of the assets that's in the European Union. And President Trump is not the one taking responsibility for freezing or using Russian assets in the United States. The Congress should do that. The Congress. So I guess we should wait for the Congress to really act on that bill that's on the floor, that is being discussed, at least in the committee. And for President Trump, it's just only a desire. It's not because he is too friendly towards Putin. It's just a desire not to be seen as a culprit, not to be seen as the one who made that decision. He might sign it, especially if it overrides president's veto.
Alexandra, thank you for joining today's discussion. We were pleased to be joined by Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst and member of the European Leadership Network UK. We appreciate your valuable insights and we look forward to connecting again next time. See you.
Thank you very much. See you soon.